60 seconds ago, Iranian leadership made a decision that could reshape the entire Middle East. The order has been given. Military commanders are moving into position. And what happens in the next hour could determine whether this crisis ends in negotiation or explodes into the widest regional war in generations. Intelligence agencies across the globe are detecting unusual activity at Iranian military installations. Communication intercepts suggest something significant is about to unfold. American forces are on highest alert. This is not speculation, this is happening right now, and the choice Iran makes in the next few minutes will either pull the region back from the abyss or push it over the edge. The crisis began 14 hours ago when American warplanes devastated Iranian air defense systems across the country. Over 200 targets were struck in a coordinated operation that crippled Iran's ability to defend its airspace. Since then, the world has been waiting to see how Tehran would respond. That response is coming now. Multiple intelligence sources are reporting that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei convened an emergency meeting of Iran's Supreme National Security Council approximately 90 minutes ago. Present at that meeting were the commanders of the Revolutionary Guard, the heads of Iranian intelligence services, and the country's senior military leadership. What was discussed remains classified at the highest levels. But the actions being taken right now reveal the outcome. Iranian ballistic missile units have received movement orders. Mobile launchers are being repositioned across the country. Proxy forces in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen are being placed on alert for coordinated operations. This is where things get serious, because Iran now faces the most consequential decision in the Islamic Republic's 45-year history. Option 1, absorb the American strikes, avoid immediate retaliation, and seek diplomatic de-escalation before the situation deteriorates further. Option 2, strike back with everything they have, accept the devastating American response that will inevitably follow, and hope that demonstrating resolve will deter future attacks. There is no good choice, only a decision about which catastrophe to risk. And the intelligence coming in right now suggests Iran has chosen option 2. Iranian forces are not dispersing defensively, they're positioning offensively. Communication intercepts indicate operational planning for strikes against multiple targets simultaneously. American military bases in Iraq, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates are assessing their defensive posture. Air defense batteries are going to maximum readiness. Personnel at vulnerable installations are being moved to hardened shelters. Israel has activated its missile defense systems across the entire country. Iron Dome batteries are online. David's sling systems are tracking for medium-range threats. Arrow interceptors are prepared to engage ballistic missiles, because if Iran strikes, it won't just target American forces, the entire region could be engulfed within hours. Understanding why Iran might choose this path requires understanding what they stand to lose by appearing weak. The Islamic Republic has built its entire legitimacy on one central claim, that it stands defiant against American imperialism. For 45 years, through economic sanctions, international isolation, and persistent military pressure, Iran has presented itself as the one nation in the Middle East that refuses to bow to Washington. That narrative is the foundation of regime survival. If Iran absorbs a devastating American attack without meaningful response, that foundation cracks. Domestic opposition elements, brutally suppressed for decades, might see opportunity in perceived weakness. Regional rivals might conclude that Iran's deterrent is broken and act accordingly. Most dangerously, Iran's own military might question whether the current leadership can protect the nation. Revolutionary Guard commanders built careers on the promise that Iran's asymmetric capabilities would make any attack too costly for America to consider. If those capabilities fail to deter or respond, the entire strategic doctrine collapses. So Iran may be calculating that striking back, even at enormous cost, is less dangerous than doing nothing. The targets being considered reveal the scope of what Iran is contemplating. Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq houses approximately 2,000 American military personnel. The base has been hit by Iranian missiles before, in January 2020, following the American assassination of Qasem Soleimani. That strike was carefully calibrated to avoid American casualties while demonstrating capability. This time would be different. Intelligence suggests Iran is considering using its most accurate ballistic missiles against hardened structures at Al-Assad, where American personnel are concentrated. The intent would not be symbolic. It would be to inflict maximum casualties. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar is the forward headquarters for U.S. Central Command and home to over 10,000 American military personnel. The base coordinates air operations across the entire Middle East. It has never been attacked. Until now, the political complications of striking a facility in Qatar, a country that maintains relations with both Washington and Tehran, kept it off target lists. But if Iran decides restraint has failed, Al Udeid becomes a priority target. Then there's the broader proxy network. Hezbollah in Lebanon possesses over 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. Most are unguided artillery rockets with limited military value but enormous capacity to terrorize civilian populations. Some are precision-guided missiles capable of striking specific buildings in Tel Aviv. If Iran orders Hezbollah into action, Israeli cities would come under attack on a scale not seen since the country's founding. Israel's response would be devastating, potentially including ground operations into Lebanon that would transform the entire regional landscape. Iraqi militias loyal to Tehran can strike American forces across Iraq and target energy infrastructure in neighboring Gulf states. Houthi rebels in Yemen can attack Saudi Arabia and threaten shipping through the Red Sea choke point. Iran has spent decades building this network specifically for moments like this, and what happened next changed everything. Approximately 40 minutes ago, American signals intelligence detected encrypted communications between Revolutionary Guard commanders and proxy force leaders across the region. The content of those communications remains classified. But the pattern matched pre-operational coordination that intelligence analysts have been trained to recognize. Within minutes, American forces across the Middle East went to their highest alert status. Fighter aircraft were scrambled from carriers in the Gulf. Air defense systems went to combat mode. Satellite surveillance focused on Iranian missile sites. For several agonizing minutes, American commanders believed a coordinated Iranian attack was imminent across multiple countries simultaneously. Then something unexpected happened. The communications stopped. Iranian missile units that had been positioning suddenly halted their movements. The elevated activity that had triggered American alerts dropped back to baseline levels. Intelligence analysts are frantically trying to determine what this means. One possibility, Iran came to the brink of launching a massive retaliation before leadership pulled back at the last moment, recognizing the catastrophic consequences. Another possibility, the entire episode was a probe, designed to test American detection capabilities and response times without actually committing to attack. A third, more troubling interpretation, Iran is demonstrating that it can bring the region to the edge of war whenever it chooses, a form of psychological warfare meant to impose costs on American decision-making. But here's what most people don't know. During those critical minutes when attack seemed imminent, American military commanders were authorized to conduct preemptive strikes if they detected imminent Iranian missile launches. The rules of engagement were clear. If Iranian missiles appeared to be preparing for immediate launch against American forces, strike preemptively to destroy them before they could fire. For a brief window, the decision about whether war would escalate was being made not in Washington or Tehran, but by field commanders watching radar screens and making split-second judgments about intent. This is how wars that nobody wants actually start, not through grand strategy or deliberate decision, but through crisis dynamics that escape control in moments of maximum tension. The world came closer to wider war in those minutes than anyone outside classified briefings currently understands. Global reaction has shifted dramatically as the crisis dynamics have accelerated. Oil prices spiked again on reports of Iranian military movements, briefly touching $150 per barrel before settling as the immediate threat appeared to recede. Energy markets are experiencing volatility not seen since the 1970s oil crisis. The economic implications extend far beyond energy. Global supply chains that route through the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil passes, are under threat. Shipping insurance rates for vessels transiting Gulf waters have increased by over 400% in the last 24 hours. Several major shipping companies have announced they're rerouting vessels away from the Gulf entirely, accepting longer transit times to avoid the risk of becoming caught in a war zone. European governments are holding emergency consultations about strategic petroleum reserves. The United States has already announced plans to release oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to stabilize markets. But these measures can only cushion the impact of supply disruptions. They cannot prevent the economic damage if the Strait of Hormuz becomes a battlefield. China has issued its strongest statement yet, calling for immediate de-escalation and warning that further military action threatens global economic stability. Beijing's concern is not primarily about Iran. It's about energy supplies that Chinese industry depends on, and the precedent being set for how great powers resolve disputes. Russia continues to provide rhetorical support for Iran while carefully avoiding any commitment to material assistance. Moscow is content to see the United States distracted in the Middle East but has no interest in direct confrontation with American forces. The United Nations Secretary General has called for an immediate ceasefire and offered to mediate between the parties. The offer will almost certainly be rejected by both sides, but it establishes a diplomatic option if either party decides they need an exit ramp. Regional reactions remain divided along sectarian and strategic lines. Israel's prime minister addressed the nation, warning that any attack on Israeli territory will be met with overwhelming force. Military censors are restricting media reporting on defensive preparations, a sign of how seriously Israeli leadership is taking the threat. Saudi Arabia has quietly activated its own crisis management protocols. The kingdom's oil infrastructure, targeted by Iranian-backed forces in 2019, remains vulnerable despite billions spent on enhanced security. Iraq's government has issued desperate calls for restraint, knowing that its territory could become the primary battlefield if this crisis escalates. American forces operate from Iraqi bases while Iranian-backed militias hold significant power within Iraq's political system. Baghdad has no good options, and social media has become its own battlefield. Unverified videos claiming to show Iranian military movements, satellite imagery of varying authenticity, rumors and disinformation spreading faster than fact-checkers can debunk them. The information environment has become so polluted that even intelligence agencies are struggling to separate signal from noise. So what happens next? The immediate future depends on decisions being made right now in Tehran. If Iranian leadership concludes that the near attack accomplished its purpose, demonstrating capability while avoiding the consequences of actual retaliation, then crisis dynamics might stabilize. Both sides could claim they achieved their objectives and seek diplomatic off-ramps. But if Iran interprets American preparedness to preempt as evidence that Washington is determined to destroy Iranian military capabilities regardless of Iranian actions, then the logic of use it or lose it becomes overwhelming. Why preserve missile forces that will be destroyed anyway? Why show restraint when restraint invites further attack? This is the terrible spiral of security dilemma dynamics. Actions taken for defensive purposes are interpreted as offensive preparations. Precautions taken to avoid war become provocations that make war more likely. American military planners are now facing their own difficult choices. The first wave of strikes degraded Iranian air defenses but left most offensive capabilities intact. If the assessment is that Iran will strike eventually, regardless of American actions, then the military logic favors striking first, while Iranian forces are partially disabled. But expanding the target set to include offensive capabilities means attacking Revolutionary Guard bases, missile production facilities, and potentially leadership targets. That's a qualitatively different level of escalation with unpredictable consequences. Some voices in Washington are arguing that the United States should offer Iran a face-saving diplomatic solution. Acknowledge that American objectives have been achieved, propose talks about reducing tensions, give Tehran a way to stand down without appearing to capitulate. Others argue that any pause now simply allows Iran to rebuild capabilities that will threaten American forces in the future. That the only way to establish lasting deterrence is to continue operations until Iranian offensive capabilities are comprehensively destroyed. These are not decisions with clear right answers. They're choices between different categories of risk in an environment of radical uncertainty, and they're being made under incredible time pressure by people operating on minimal sleep with incomplete information. Zooming out, this crisis represents a collision between two incompatible visions of Middle Eastern order. The United States has maintained military dominance in the region since the 1991 Gulf War. That dominance has guaranteed freedom of navigation, protected allied governments, and ensured energy supplies flow to global markets. But maintaining that dominance requires periodic demonstrations of American willingness to use overwhelming force. Deterrence only works if potential adversaries believe American threats are credible. Iran has challenged that order for decades, building asymmetric capabilities specifically designed to impose unacceptable costs on American military operations. The strategy has been to make American dominance so expensive to maintain that eventually Washington loses interest and withdraws. For years, both approaches coexisted in uneasy tension. American forces remained in the region but avoided large-scale confrontation with Iran. Iran expanded influence through proxies but avoided direct attacks that might trigger devastating American response. That equilibrium has now collapsed. The attack that killed American service members 11 days ago crossed a threshold that decades of careful escalation management had avoided. American retaliation crossed another threshold, and now both nations are in territory neither wanted to enter. The question is whether new equilibrium can be established before the situation spirals completely out of control. Historical precedents offer limited guidance. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis demonstrated that nuclear-armed adversaries can pull back from the brink through careful diplomacy and back-channel communication. But it also demonstrated how easily miscalculation can nearly trigger catastrophe. The 1914 July crisis showed how great power tensions can explode into devastating conflict despite the fact that no major actor actually wanted general war. We're living through a moment that could go either direction. And the decisions being made right now in real time will determine which historical precedent this crisis ultimately resembles. Right now, Iranian commanders are weighing orders they may have to execute within hours. American pilots are sitting in cockpits, ready to launch if the order comes. Intelligence analysts are watching screens looking for the signals that will indicate which path has been chosen. And ordinary people across the Middle East are going about their lives, unaware that their futures hang in the balance of decisions being made in rooms they'll never see by people they'll never meet. This is the reality of modern geopolitics. For all our technology, all our precision weapons, all our sophisticated analysis, the fundamental dynamic remains what it has always been. States compete for power and security in a system with no higher authority to enforce order. That competition sometimes leads to cooperation, sometimes to uneasy coexistence, and sometimes to war. Right now, we're watching that competition approach a critical decision point. Iran's next move could change everything. It could open a path to de-escalation and eventual diplomatic resolution, or it could trigger the widest regional war in generations, with consequences that ripple across the globe. The choice is being made right now. And by the time you watch this, the world may already know which path was chosen, or we may still be waiting, trapped in this agonizing uncertainty, while the clock ticks down toward a decision point that cannot be postponed forever. This is the fragility of global order laid bare, the thin line between stability and chaos, the narrow margin between crisis and catastrophe, and the terrible truth that sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, despite rational actors making what they believe are defensive choices, the dynamics of crisis can overwhelm control and produce outcomes nobody wanted. Iran's next move is coming. The world is watching. And what happens next will echo for decades.